connected up, and we're connected up. Welcome all you here present and all you online, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you find us. We're glad you're here, and we hope you'll enjoy the message this morning. My name is Todd. I'm an occasional speaker here. This will be my first message this year. Be continuing on in March again. So our story this morning is Ruth, the story of redemption. Now, sometimes I hear people talking bad about the Old Testament, and they don't like it, and it makes me wonder, well, what part of it are you reading, and why don't you like it? I mean, what is it you don't like about it? Yeah, there's part of it that's the law, and I thought about that. You know, I'm an electrician, and we have this giant book of codes and rules, and a lot of it's not all that fun to read, and it kind of gives you some guidelines. You must do at least this much, but you can't go past here, so you've got this room where you have to kind of figure it out. It's not enough to actually do the job, but it's enough to kind of keep you out of trouble and on the right track. So there's many parts of the Old Testament, but the parts I like best are the stories, the old stories, and the characters and heroes and that sort of thing. And I always liked a good story well told. So for that reason, I tend towards the stories. For a long time during my drive time to work, Chuck Swindoll would be on the radio as I'm driving around to different jobs and things, and he would always say, somewhere in a story you can find yourself, and I like that. So that kind of helps me to put some perspective on these stories. Sometimes when we hear a story, we identify with the hero. Sometimes we're identify with the victim, and sometimes we're the bad guy. Just all depends on the story and where you find yourself at the moment. There are certain movies and comedies that I like, and one of them that came to mind for whatever reason is the story is called What About Bob, with Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss. And in this story, Richard Dreyfuss is this kind of famous psychologist, and he's put a book out, and he's getting ready to do the talk show tour, and he's trying to get all his things in order and do everything just right. And this guy comes to him, the Bill Murray character, Bob, and he's a total basket case, and all this hijinks ensue. And whether or not you like this movie kind of depends on whether you see yourself as the Richard Dreyfuss character trying to do things right and follow your plan, or if you're the Bill Murray character just trying to hold on and figure out how to get through life. It's kind of interesting, the psychologist guy, he's doing everything, and it all seems reasonable, but this guy, Bob, just kind of throws a wrench in it and hits him with reality instead of the theoretical plan things, and the hijinks ensue. I didn't want to get too much into that, but just kind of give the idea that somewhere in a story you can find yourself, and sometimes it's fun and sometimes not so much, depending on whether you're learning a lesson or the hero. Sometimes it frustrates me that there's not more details in some of these Bible stories. I mean, you read them and they're kind of general and stuff, but then as you kind of put yourself in there and apply them, that gives you room for it to fit your situation. I mean, there's enough for a good solid lesson, but it could apply to different times in your life and different things. So for this reason, they're kind of an outline, kind of general, but they're specific enough to really glean some good solid messages. I remember in school trying to read Moby Dick, and it was sold as this great novel by this great novelist and all these things. And I remember we read and we read and we read and we read, and we got through the description of the room they stayed in the first night before they went to sea. I thought, I can't do this. I could probably draw a picture of that room, but that's way more detail than I want or need. So some things are for some people like that, some people don't, but sometimes it's good. Throughout our lives, books and movies have shaped our imagination and how we look at events. Lately, it seems that many of these stories that are on TV and movies kind of lack originality. They're kind of remakes of stuff. I mean, I've been around for a little while, so some of these things come around, and some of them are the exact same story with different people in it. So we need some originality, I think. And sometimes it's important to notice that things do kind of come back around. I've noticed in talking to some of the younger people, they think they're the first ones to experience this, and they're the only ones that know, how things are and what must happen. Like, no, this has happened before, and this is the way it's going to go. It's going to turn out this way. Well, what do you know? It's your fault. It's like this. Well, maybe it is, maybe it didn't, but this is where it's going to go. Sometimes they think it's noble to focus on only the bad things that have come up in our lives. But sometimes I think it's good to look at the good things as well as the bad things. We need to learn from the bad things as well as remember the good things and repeat those. Jesus used stories and parables to teach and sometimes to chastise. The stories he told had just enough detail to speak truth to the listeners while allowing them to apply them to the generations to come. And we find we continue to struggle with the same lessons. Sometimes I wish I could learn the lesson the first time, but I don't. The story we're looking at today is the book of Ruth. I think the book of Ruth is such a well-told story. It's filled with lessons, depending on where you find yourself. And maybe even if you don't know you're there, it has lessons for us to follow. When we study these Old Testament books, everything comes into play. You kind of have to look at the names of the characters, look at the place, the history of the people, what's going on, what have they been through, and how do they react. And nowadays, it's a little more easier, I think, because we can just Google up a map of where is this place or do a quick search instead of having to break out the big Bible concordance and dig through that and try and find some details. So I think we have some good tools these days. Sometimes there's a lot of bad things on the internet and Google, but sometimes there's good things too. And some of us heard these stories, whether in vacation Bible school or Sunday school as kids, stories like creation, Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, and etc. Some of them are long stories and some of them are short stories. I know for me, understanding things requires knowing why I would want to understand this story. How does it apply to me? How do I fit into it? Who are these people and why do I care? Some of the stories and even modern movies I'll watch over and over again, and Jeannie will say, well, I've seen these. We've seen this already. I think, well, I know I've seen it, but sometimes it's more than just knowing how it ends. It's seeing the story, walking through the story. Sometimes you pick up a little something different each time you walk through it. So I think it's good to kind of go through these things. Repetition. And yeah, there's detail, and depending on what you're going through, it sticks out to you second or third or fifth time through it. When I read it, I feel the story told over and over again. It's getting when I read the book of Ruth, it's a story that it seems as you read it, you think this has been told over and over, and it's kind of refined, it's kind of polished, it's smooth, it's complete in the way that it goes. And I was studying, like, where did this come from? How did it get written? And some of the sources attribute it to the prophet Samuel, who would have been a couple of generations after the event. They say he wrote it. And others say it was written around the time of Nehemiah, after the captivity. And I was thinking, it's possible that it was written by Samuel, and it's told and written and rewritten, and these guys might have done the final version that we see to address certain issues that were going on at that time. There's a lot of issues with bringing in foreigners and different things that come into this story, and sometimes those things come into it. I think if we don't study history, I believe we're destined to repeat it. And a lot of things that happened recently concern me about people that don't know the history, and they don't understand what's going on, and they want to react to what's happening now as if it doesn't have a history behind it. And a lot of times over my life, I've been around some Jewish people and Jewish relationships, and gone to some of their ceremonies and services, bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and the like. And one thing I noticed is they have a way of remembering the people that have gone for him, remembering their relatives that have died, and remembering the people that have built the community. And to me, that seems like a valuable thing, because we're remembering, how did we get here? We didn't just arrive here. People built this, and people put their lives into a community like this church, and communities like Houston and Seabrook. And I mean, there's a history that goes to it, and people gave their lives and put themselves into it. And those things are important to know and understand about how we relate to this community. And I think it's good that they're intentional about it, and I think we could learn to be intentional. And it's important to learn from different cultures and things. I share a birthday with Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'm inspired by his words and efforts to bring different people together. And I found a quote of his from a speech at Cornell, and it goes as followed. I'm convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other. It's always better, I think, to be curious than to be judgmental. Sometimes when I see people that I don't know or understand, I try and take time and ask them questions. Well, why is this important to you, or why? I went to school with a lot of people that were from the Middle East and Muslims and stuff, and we'd have some conversations sometimes between class. I was an engineering student, so we had projects and things. We were always in the lab messing around with stuff. You get a little chance to talk and ask them questions, and eventually they'd get around to asking me questions about Christianity, and because they thought we were just a bunch of lazy slackers and we didn't pray certain times every day, and there was not much to what we did. And as we had conversations, I think they were able to learn a little bit from me about what Christians are about, and I learned a little bit about them, and we learned about the cultures, and I've always liked water and the oceans and stuff, and they would talk to me about the desert and the peace of the desert at night, and the stars, and away from the noises and other things. It's like, so I could kind of, you can identify with people, so it's, I think, good to get to know people, even if we don't agree. So, as we look at the book of Ruth, I invite you to be curious and see how the Spirit leads and inspires you to find yourself in the story. The story of Ruth takes place in the end of the time of Judges. And during the time of Judges, leaders were called on to lead the people through specific events. People like Gideon, Deborah, and Samson. So they would have a time when this particular person came out and he helped the Israelites through a certain event. In the last verses in the book of Judges, in those days, Israel didn't have a king. The people did anything they thought was right. And I think our time is very much like that. I see people trying to not try and find out the right thing, but trying to justify what they think they should do. And I think that's exactly where they were when we start this story of Ruth. We're trying to justify themselves, do what they think is right, and get everyone else to follow along. I'm not sure how well you know this story, so I thought I would start by reading the story. It might be kind of tedious, maybe not, maybe it'll be fun, but I just feel like it's good to have the whole thing to kind of pin things to. I thought, as I was studying, try to start breaking things down and dig into verse by verse, paragraph by paragraph, but then it's like, well, if you don't know the whole thing, then some of that doesn't make sense until you get there, and like me, I like to know why, so you start throwing me a bunch of details, and I don't know why, they just fly right on out. So hopefully, in this way, we can kind of have the story to pin things to as we dig into it this year. This is, I searched different versions, and they had, some are better, but word for word translations, some are better for reading, and I finally went with one that I'm the most familiar with, is the New International Version, and that's kind of where I spent most of my years studying out of that version, so it just feels familiar. So we'll start here, Ruth, chapter 1, verse 1. We can start with once upon a time. In the days when judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They are Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah, the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to a son, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept aloud again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went out until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life ever very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. And Boaz asked the overseer of the harvest, "Who does this young woman belong to?" And the overseers replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." So she came into the field and has remained here from morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay hands on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes, that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread, and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain, and she ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves, and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the fields until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over when she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead," she added. "That man is our close relative, and he is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grains.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the woman of Boaz to glean until the barley harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. One day Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be provided for." Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you said," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you have shown earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I'm a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So he lay at his feet until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belongs to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, on the day that you buy the land from Naomi, you also require Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with the property. At this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in the Ephrath, and the famous in Bethlehem. The offspring of the Lord, the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. The genealogy of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Aminadab. Aminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. And that's the end of our story. So we talked a little bit of the mindset of the people in Israel at the time, and how I think we're in a similar time now where where people do as they see fit. And the story starts, there's a famine in the land. Crops are failing. Things are not going well for Elimelech and his family. So they decide to take matters into their own hands, pack up and seek their fortune elsewhere. The name Elimelech means God is my king. Something is important to understand about this in the time of Judges and the transition to the time of Kings is this. God is their king, and he wants them to know this and seek their leadership from him. But at the end of the time of Judges, the people are crying out for a king. They want a king because their neighbor countries have kings, and they want one too. It's kind of funny how we always want the things that we don't have, and usually we really don't need. God knows what happens with kings and wants them to look to him as their king. Again, I'll say, because it seems like at this point, the point being emphasized at the beginning of the story as well as the end of the last book is that people are doing things their own way. Which I've said before, our ways are not Yahweh's, meaning our plans are not God's plans, and typically our plans take us away from God's plans. The location of the story is in Bethlehem is important. Because what do we know about Bethlehem? What have we heard about Bethlehem? Who comes from Bethlehem? Bethlehem means the house of bread. So this Elimelech left the house of bread to go to the land of Moab for food. And who are the Moabites? Moab meaning from the father. The Moabites are the descendants of Lot's daughters. Moab was the son of Lot and Lot's oldest daughter, who survived the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Moabites were known to be a pagan at the time, and some references made it out to be a particularly humanistic society, with all the attractions of some of our modern cities, similar to like Las Vegas, Los Angeles, that sort of thing. The Lord seems to be saying to us recently through different sources that the people in the Bible are in many ways just like us. And I think that's a good way to look at this story. Instead of picturing them as strangers in a strange land with funny clothes, look at them as someone like us, someone we know, maybe even in some ways us. Before I get too deeply into the details, it seems worth looking at the origin of the book. And the different thoughts, we kind of touched on it earlier, but they think the writer could be Samuel. And Samuel was the one who anointed David. So he would have known, maybe even known Ruth, but at least her son, and going down. So he was very familiar with these people in this story. And I think in reading it, it seems like this would have been this kind of story that they told their kids and grandkids, that everybody knew this story, at least everybody in Bethlehem, in the surrounding areas. I was reading some interesting papers on it, and they get off in the weeds a little bit in pretty detail about what was going on then and what was going on in Nehemiah and why they think it was written during the time of Nehemiah. And they had, during that time, they were trying to, they were just coming back from being banished and sent out, and they were trying to purify the race, and they were afraid of any foreigners or anything like that. And there were some that thought, if the people are coming to us to pursue our God, then they're not our enemy, and we need to embrace and accept them. And some of them were like, no, and then they pointed out some things in the law in Deuteronomy, and as I read through them, it's like, well, that doesn't really apply to what happened here with Ruth and maybe some of the other situations as they had them where they were. So, anyway, just kind of summarize, Elimelech, whose name is God is our King, leaves Bethlehem, the house of bread, to seek his living among worldly pagans. What could possibly go wrong there? Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, which means pleasant or gentle, and his sons Mahlon and Chilion. They settle in Moab. Let's read this. This is the more storytelling version. Verses 3-5. Elimelech died, and Naomi was left, she and her two sons. The sons took Moabite wives. The name of the first was Orpah, the second Ruth. They lived there in Moab for the next 10 years. But then the two brothers, Mahlon and Chilion, died, and now the woman was left without either her young men or her husband. So the names of the wives were Orpah, which could mean neck or the back of the neck, and Ruth, meaning friend or friendship. I've heard some sayings about the man being the head of the household, but the wife is the neck, which means she can steer the head which way it's going. So it's a team effort, but each has their own role. There's not much commentary about whose idea it was for them to go to Moab. Was Elimelech taking charge and trying to provide for his family in a way that seemed good to him? Was Naomi pushing him, saying, we got to do something, things are not going well? Ourselves and some of our friends have kind of been through some time of famine and trying to figure things out, and I'm not sure we always make the best decisions. I remember back when, a previous time of famine, when I worked for Hewlett-Packard, and they eventually sent my job to India and left me without a job in the town where they were the only computer makers. And, I kind of maybe I considered it for a while, but it was a pretty quick move to start my own business. Not sure that was the best choice for me, or even God's choice for me, because it took a lot of my time, took me away from my family and time with the Lord. We were pretty involved in our church, and I spent a lot of time doing things, and this took me away from some of that. So I have to wonder, sometimes, just like the story, you make your own choice and you go your own direction instead of consulting the Lord, and it leads to death in some ways or levels to another. Yeah, into the wilderness for sure. But because of that choice, we had difficult times, financial and otherwise. And we cannot reverse that time necessarily, but like in this story, there is redemption. And once we return back to the Lord and His people, there is redemption for us. The Lord is waiting for us, and He's prepared for us. And, as I think how this story plays out, and I think about how the Lord can use us and work out His plans, even though we're rebellious and filled with doubt and unbelief, we find Naomi now a widow with her 2 sons. Those sons may not be too healthy. And there's a mention of 10 years, which seemed like after they got married there were 10 years, that they also died. So I'm not sure how long overall they were there in Moab, but it was a good while. And then they returned. So let's read a little bit about that return story. In Ruth 1:6-7. One day she got herself together, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, to leave the country of Moab and set out for home. She had heard that God had been pleased to visit His people and giving them food. And so she started out from that place she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, on the road back to the land of Judah. Learning that things were better back home, Naomi decided to go back. It's often hard to let go of our plans, and even when we see them failing. Naomi seems to have accepted that Moab is not the place for her, and she takes the step to return to her God and to her people. God's been teaching me that it's important for us to respond and take that step. Sometimes it's easy. I get into this kind of analysis paralysis, they call it, where I keep weighing all the options, but I don't do anything. And as I've said some other times, it's, if you're not moving, you can look any which direction, but you're still stopped. Sometimes we have to take a step to allow the Lord to guide our path and to lead us in the direction He wants us to go. So it's important for us to take that step. Even if it's a wrong step, we can still be corrected. I think God has some exciting things for us in this new year, and I hope we'll all be willing to take the step towards God and see where He leads us. This book of Ruth has often spoken to me, and I think it fits with the lessons we have been studying on Wednesday nights about how God, with people like us, can do extraordinary things. Ruth, by her willingness to do what was needed and with humble kindness, was able to be a part of the story of our salvation. She chose to seek the God of Naomi and to join his plan, becoming the great-grandmother of King David. I wonder if she had any sense at the time that she would be part of such a great plan. I hope as you go through your life in this year, you can do the ordinary things put out for you to do, knowing that you are part of the plans of the Almighty. And that's what I have for you today. Thank you for listening, and the Lord bless you, and may you be a wonderful part of the plans of the Almighty this year. All right. We thank you for joining us. We invite you to share this with your friends and family. You can get the audios on bayviewcc.org. You can see us on Facebook Live at Bayview Christian Center. The YouTube videos can be found at Bayview Christian Center. Wednesday night, How to Study the Bible with Craig, Gershill, and Pastor Chico facilitating, so we invite you to come out to that, 7 p.m. Wednesday nights. If you'd like to give to our ministry here at Bayview, you can text GIVE to 281-559-6580. Is that it? That's it. Well, thank you again.